Behind opioid use, eating disorders have the second leading cause of, or highest mortality rate for mental health disorders. So opioid use number one, and
Wow.
then eating disorders number two.
That is crazy.
Student athletes are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop an eating disorder. Around like 85% of female student athletes admit some form of disordered eating.
So basically 9 out of every 10 people.
The biggest thing with eating disorders is that they thrive in secrecy, and the fact that it's uncomfortable to talk about makes it just, I think, flourish in our sport. I couldn't be everything that I wanted to be for a student athlete, and I couldn't always put the human first because my job was, at the end of the day, performance.
My people, if you're listening and if you want to have the best cross-country season of your life, the best marathon of your life this fall, I have the perfect product for you. This product is one of the most studied products of all time, and you'll know it when I say it, bicarb, but a very specific version of bicarb. I'm talking about bicarb 3.0 and bicarb.shop. And if you don't believe me, the best of the best are taking it. Simeon Birnbaum set the NCAA collegiate record and won the NCAA title in dominant fashion while on bicarb 3.0. Bicarb 3.0 isn't just the best bicarb on the market, but it takes away the effects that a lot of people have on their stomach with the formulations and the ways that they've really created and pioneered a new product in this space. They also have something really cool going on if you are a serious high school, collegiate, or even amateur athlete, where you can join their affiliate program, get free product, make commission off of the sales you generate. You can go to their website, bicarb.shop, to learn more. Bicarb 3.0 is the wave. Join or get left behind. Bicarb.shop. Check it out today and enjoy today's episode of the podcast. Ashley Bastron, welcome to The Running Effect. I want to start here. I had a good friend and coach share your social media post, and she said, you got to get this girl on the podcast. So I want to read your social media post because I think there's a lot that can be broken down from it, but people are lazy. And if I say, hey, go read it, people probably won't. So I'm going to read it live. So you said, the title of Coach Ashley has impacted my life in more ways than I could ever put into words. I loved having the opportunity to help athletes become the best versions of themselves and accomplish things they once thought were impossible. But more than any result, I cherish the relationships built along the way and the trust my athletes placed in me. While saying goodbye was never going to be easy, I feel incredibly grateful to have found something that makes saying see you later so hard. As the landscape of the NCAA continues to shift toward valuing money and results, often at the expense of the people it's meant to serve, I found myself increasingly conflicted about where I was meant to be. But through my internship at Nourished and Known Counseling, I discovered the possibility of a new direction, one that always put people first and felt deeply aligned with my values. While this is the hardest decision I've ever made, it's also one I feel confident and at peace with. And I know that athletes at Wake Forest are in great hands with a coach who genuinely cares about them as people. So here's to a new chapter as a full-time clinical mental health counselor and forever one of the biggest Demon Deacon fans. I'm excited to continue serving athletes in this new role while also supporting anyone navigating life challenges who could use a little extra help. Life is hard, my friends. Taking care of your mental health is one of the strongest things you can do. Where do you want to start? What stands out to you from me reading that to you, your own words?
Well, I was like, gosh, you're trying to make me cry in the first 60 seconds of the podcast. Yeah, I think all of it was from the heart and kind of where I was coming from, what I was feeling. And obviously it's tough to walk away from, something I've been doing for over a decade. And there's so many amazing moments. And again, the relationships, and it's obviously like, I can still have relationships with many people in the industry, but it changes when, I won't see someone every weekend, or obviously won't see the student athletes every day. So hard, but beautiful and exciting and all of the feels at the same time.
When you thought about sitting down to write that post, was it like you had your phone and your notes app and sort of just off the dome? Was it like computer, like tea, classical music on in the background, sentimental? Like what was your mind state getting that out?
Gosh, a little bit of everything. I think obviously had been replaying it in my mind and probably ruminating on it more than I should have been for too many days. And then was kind of like, okay, I just need to sit down and write it. And once Coach Hayes had found the new replacement for Wake Forest, and it was someone that I was really excited about and knew would be excellent, it kind of made writing it easier because I meant what I said in terms of like the new coach is going to take great care of them and value them as people. And so I think the hardest part of leaving was not knowing who would take over. And, that's scary because I really care about the women's well-being. And so I think it just made it easier to be able to close the chapter knowing that they were going to be in good hands, and there, may or may not have been some tears shed. So
Tears are
yeah.
good. Tears are good. You
Yeah.
say, as the landscape of the NCAA continues to shift toward valuing money and results, often at the expense of the people it's meant to serve. How did you see that? Where are those words coming from? Because I see them,
Yeah.
but I want to hear it from
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. I think NIL years ago started as this really cool idea. Why shouldn't student athletes be able to profit off their name, image, and likeness? And I think that's still something that, like, at its core, I believe in. And I have student athletes that have created cool businesses and, I don't know, just done some really unique things that are a cool way for them to like showcase the talents they have outside of athletics. But then, and not so much, at the cross country and track level as much as it is at the, football, basketball. But now you have these athletes kind of sense of self, which is already delicate in terms of identifying as an athlete, coming into like brands and contracts and playing time. And if I have a bad game, am I going to get torn apart on social media? And am I going to lose my sponsorship deal? And, obviously pro athletes have to deal with those realities, but they're generally, 25 plus, or, at least a little bit older. And so I think when you're taking an 18-year-old and giving them all this, money and pressure, and it's just kind of a recipe for mental health issues to arise. And I don't think we are doing our part in terms of the education part, both from a financial responsibility, but also how to block out the noise. I've had some student athletes in the past that have gotten like kind of social media famous, and people are really mean, like so
I can tell you
cruel.
that.
Yes, yeah, I'm sure you experience that too, and it's really hard to like block it out. They say it takes, for one negative comment, you need five positive ones, and sometimes you get that, but oftentimes you don't, and it's really easy to like fixate on the negative side. And then yeah, obviously rev share and roster spots and all of those things. I could get into that stuff too, but I think the just that pressure that student athletes are feeling to be more than just athletes and students, and that aren't really getting the backing to know how to do that.
Maybe I'm just like on the opposite end of that study, the 1 through 5. But there have been situations and times where I, I know others who feel this way. Like you'll get like, I don't want to say hundreds or thousands, but theoretically, like a ton of praise for something. Let's
Yep.
say this: you got in public, or I'll just speak within my family. Okay, I'm one of
Okay.
6. I'm the youngest of 6 kids. If
Okay.
I'm wearing something I feel like looks nice, and 4 say I look nice, but 1 says I doesn't, I just fixate on the one that says I don't. And it's
Yes.
like, why don't you like XYZ shoes? Why don't you like
Yep.
XYZ whatever? And I think a lot of people can relate to that experience as well. It's like, it doesn't matter how many previous or present positive comments you get. If there's a negative one, that's what your brain's going to fixate on. Because you're like,
Yeah.
why am I being rejected? Why don't you like
Exactly.
this? Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Or like one negative result on the T first page, and it's like, oh my gosh, everyone's gonna see this like bad race, and it's like, girl, you have so many good races.
Yeah.
Like people are not gonna fixate on that one negative one, but it feels like they are, and it can feel really overwhelming in that moment.
If I'm not mistaken, you started your coaching career at Belmont. You were taking a grad transfer season, and then the next year that transferred into being a graduate assistant, coaching while earning your master's of sports administration. That was
Yep.
2014, if I'm not mistaken. So 12 years ago.
Yeah.
What's the difference between entering the sport in 2014 and leaving it in 2026?
Wow. So much. I feel like, when I went into coaching, it was just like, I want to help people. And coaching is the way that I do that because I ran, and then I thought coaching would be really cool. Um, and so I think like at its core, that's what it was, and obviously helping people run fast along the way was fun. But the focus on it was just helping people, and I think that growth and development, obviously, before being at Wake, I mean, I was a volunteer at Florida State, but only for about 10 months. I was at smaller schools, so there was a lot more of the like growth and development side, and taking someone that maybe didn't have stellar stats out of high school and trying to make them great. And then obviously transitioning to Power Four and now that it's a four, it was a five when I initially started, right? It's a lot more on the results side, and then I think coaches are feeling really pressured to like get proven talent, because the ACC is so competitive, the SEC is competitive, the Big Ten, like Big 12, like it's hard to take an 18-year-old out of high school and have them come in and make an impact immediately. Obviously they do sometimes, and so I think losing that like growth and development time was one of the biggest changes for me too, that was hard, because I like working with 18 to 22 year olds. It's a lot of fun, and there's so much, I don't know, just like growth and shaping and development, and them going from kind of knowing who they are in terms of their home environment, but then figuring out who they are in terms of what am I and what do I want if mom and dad aren't around, and watching that growth process. And so I think I was just a little less interested in like getting someone that was already an adult. I like that like emerging adult age frame. So I think that was a really big change too, of who should I be recruiting in order to be competitive, um, and to like meet the league, but then also who do I want to be recruiting, because it aligns well with like what I feel like my purpose in this sport is. Um, and then obviously, yeah, NIL, rev share, roster, um, so much has changed. I think every day something changes. I saw this week that now the class of 2022 is maybe going to get eligibility back, and but we don't really know. And I was just like, wow, that's not, I guess, my problem anymore.
Yeah, you're probably
But
like, I
how
stepped away at the
stressful.
right time.
Yeah,
Well, even this,
exactly.
a lot of people, I went public on social media with this. I think it was my most interacted Instagram story maybe ever. Just the young man, not boy, who is going to Texas, who I think will be 25 by the time he steps on campus. And everyone's like, what about the new age rule? And it's like, it doesn't take effect until whatever year. I think it's like next year. Then, so it's just like everything's a mess. Everything's up in the air. In terms of you recruiting and you walking me through that process, how much do you think your background sort of in counseling and understanding those core subjects and matters influenced how you viewed recruiting and how you viewed these subjects?
Yeah, I think probably a lot, and I think my background in eating disorders and disordered eating also, I think, impacted my recruiting, because I was a way to make athletes that had struggled with that in the past feel really safe and not feel ashamed for what they had gone through. And um, so I think I found myself becoming kind of the coach that a lot of people, if they had struggled with that, were really open with in the recruiting process. Um, and then we were able to navigate it together and stay, I guess, injury free in a way, but realistically just not relapse from the eating disorder, and stay in a really good place with that. And that, I think, became something that I don't know, I guess slowly over time got known for. And that was cool too, to be able to like support them and have them know like, hey, yeah, you had this disorder at one point in time, but it doesn't define you, and it doesn't define your running career. And as long as we do things the right way, and we're getting in enough fuel, and you're going to therapy, and all of the things that it takes in order to make sure that that relapse doesn't occur again, um, that they can still have this amazing career. And so I think that was a big part of recruiting for me, that was very unintentional, but kind of I guess became a niche in a weird way. um, but I felt, I guess, like really educated in terms of doing it the right way, through the background in counseling. And the Nourished and Known specializes in eating disorders, so that was like most of my clinical population that I was working with, and is what I'd like to continue working with obviously student athletes struggling with a lot of things, but specifically eating disorders.
I had this conversation with a really successful NCAA athlete. I won't name her for her own sake, of keeping our conversation private. But she was telling me, I was just saying like, man, like I feel like so much of the NCAA has eating disorders and young athletes, and they just don't talk about it. And like you look
Yeah.
at the statistics, and it's crazy. It's like nearly everyone. It's like
Yeah.
more likely you have an eating disorder than you don't. What was it
Yes.
like being on the inside and actually seeing that? And can you raise some visibility for? It's actually like sort of an existential crisis we have of young athletes with eating disorders. We just don't talk about it. I don't think people
Yeah.
realize how bad it is. It's really bad.
No, no, they don't. I totally agree. And I think, when you talk about the statistics, it's student athletes are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop an eating disorder, disordered eating. I think it's either 1 in 4 or 1 in 5. Female athletes are going to be clinically diagnosed with an eating disorder. So not just the disordered eating side of things, which is even higher. And then I think it's around like 85% of female student athletes admit to, in the NCAA, because the NCAA has done studies on this too, admit to like some form of disordered eating, whether to, try and lose weight for sport or,
So basically, 9 out of every 10 people.
yeah, yeah,
It's unreal.
which is unreal. And I think our sport has normalized it, and then not talked about it. And so I think it's really great. There's starting to be some pros that I feel like are talking about it in really positive ways. And obviously Angelina that I coached, she's super public with hers on social media as well, and is a great follow. So I'll plug her. But I think it's just not talked about because it's uncomfortable and people don't really know where to start. And I think for the recruits that I've talked to on the phone about it, they've been like, wow, I don't usually share this much on a first call, or like with a college coach, but I feel like you're not going to judge me for it. And I'm like, I'm not, because I like understand it. And so I think there's so many things that get praised as like healthy that are actually really disordered. And so that's it. And then there's still the myth, even though we are in 2026, that like losing your menstrual cycle is not a big deal. And, it's just like, oh, it's because you're really fit and normal for runners. And it's like, no, it's not. It's not normal. And we should do something about it. So, yeah, I think the biggest thing with eating disorders is that they thrive in secrecy. And the fact that it's uncomfortable to talk about makes it just, I think, flourish in our sport. And it's so hard, to see so many people struggling with it. And so I don't know, I think working with so many student athletes that struggle with it, having teammates that have struggled with it, and then being at an internship site that focused on that just really ignited a passion of like wanting to make meaningful change in that area to give people the opportunity to have long careers and not, end up needing to leave the sport in high school or early college because the injuries are just too hard to overcome.
I assume there are situations where, kids maybe have tendencies that lead toward eating disorders, but I would guess it's an assumption. So you're the expert. You tell me if I'm wrong. Vast majority of the 85% we're referencing, like, do not grow up this way, and there are moments in their life that lead them down that path. What do you think those are? Like, why? At what point? Obviously, it's going to be different for people, but from what
Yeah.
you've sort of concocted, why are people developing disordered eating?
Yeah, I think within athletes specifically, there's like that a strong type A personality of like, if I do anything, I could just do a little bit more, right? So I think a lot of times we dip into more of like the orthorexia category, which is just like an obsession with healthful eating. And then they start to get praised for their discipline and how well they're doing. And you even hear parents say, like, oh yeah, like my daughter is so disciplined, she'll never eat a dessert, And it's like, for me, huge red flag. For the average
Yeah.
person is like, oh, that's so great that they eat mostly fruits, vegetables, protein, whatever. And I'm like, okay, disordered, like sirens are going. Um, and so I think that side of it, the perfectionism, and the tendency to just overanalyze and want to do everything right, there's a lot of like really rigid thinking patterns involved. And then I think control is an overwhelming one. If life feels out of control in any one area, the one thing I can control is what I consume or what I don't consume. And I think initially the eating disorder kind of starts with these like promises of like success and you're going to be happier if you do this, and then all of a sudden it spirals completely out of control and they're actually miserable and not really enjoying anything in life. But by that point, it's kind of taken hold and it can be really hard to overcome that. So the earlier you can catch it, the better, which is, again, I think why I want to try and just like voice some of those warning signs. I've done a lot of work with like local teams in town, high school teams, in terms of this is what, as a coach, you should be monitoring. Parents, this is what you should be monitoring. Athletes on the team, this is the types of conversations that maybe you'll hear a teammate say, oh, I can't eat that because like that'll hurt my performance, or um, I don't know, just comments in general on bodies and things like that. So um, yeah, I think there's so many factors that can lead to it, and obviously, like you said, it is different for everyone, um, but it's just, yeah, so important in the work that we do, and our sport really needs it.
Obviously there are specific examples and individualities throughout studies or whatever, but from your assessment, would you generally say that most develop it like in high school and then it gets worse when they get to the NCAA?
Yeah, that seems to be the average age of onset, is usually like in those, when you're kind of navigating those period or puberty changes, because obviously your body is changing a lot. You're starting to get more commentary on those changes. Sometimes performance can dip initially before it goes back to being
Which sucks, by
at
the
a
way.
high
Can we have this
level. Yeah,
conversation about
yeah,
I just feel like boys develop at a very like similar, I mean, sure, I've definitely seen some like crazy tall or jacked or like dudes with beards by their senior year of
yeah.
high school, and I'm like, what in the world's going on? But I feel like for the most part, men or boys, they develop at similar rates, whereas female development ages 14 through 18 could not be more different. And I say that with a lot of love and grace. Like if you look at a high school cross country team, generally it's very much like across the board, you're going to see differences.
Yeah, I think like the age 14 to 18, especially for girls, is like they can look so different, and they can experience, some are going to menstruate, as young as like 10 or 12, and then others might not start menstruating till like 14, and you just don't know. And so I think when you're looking around at your teammates, there's a lot of like just tendencies for comparison and self-judgment, and especially maybe if someone on your team that is the fastest hasn't navigated puberty yet. And so then there's that idea that like the pre-puberty body is going to be the fastest body. And I know, Lauren Fleshman has spoken up about that. Ali Ostrander has spoken up about that. Trying to think of some other ones that have done a lot of good work there. But those are the two that kind of initially come to mind, and how there was like this fear of getting their menstrual cycle and going through puberty because of what was going to happen. And that is, I think, portrayed in our sport as to be a scary thing. And it shouldn't. It's like an exciting thing. You're growing and developing. And the only way you're going to have a long term career in this sport is if you let that process run its course, and you don't try and, manipulate it into being something your body isn't meant to be during that time. So, like, gain the weight, have your period, have the body changes. Like, if you are able to stay consistent, the performance is going to come again on the other side. But there's so much fear that it won't. And then and maybe initially it stalls, a lot of people just drop out of sport. And that, I think, initially reinforces that idea of like, okay, well, I'll never be as fast as I was before. And that's something I've navigated a lot with college student athletes of like, well, my PRs were 20 pounds ago, and I'll never be good at this. And it's like, let's reframe that. Like, you're stronger now. Like, let's get the mindset piece in lock. Like, there's consistency there, and you will be stronger and you will be faster in the future. Um, but it can be scary for them to like even say that out loud. Um, and I feel like a lot of coaches maybe don't create an environment in which it would even feel safe to say that out loud.
I want to say something controversial, but I'll say it to you. You look at like the Tour de France or even some of the fastest runners in the sport, and they just don't look healthy. How do you go about, and again, that could be assuming, that's why I'm not throwing out names. I honestly have no clue the names of people in the Tour de France, but they just do not look healthy. And I've read enough books to know the protocols and the things they do to be crazy light so that their bike moves faster, and a lot of runners have similar mindsets. But they might, for a time run really fast or bike really fast or whatever the terminology would be. How do you get it through an athlete's head that like no time is worth your health? And even if you are temporarily better or faster, these trade-offs are not worth it. Specifically for a young female, like missing your period consistently, you can do long-term bone
Yeah.
damage. And it might not
Yeah.
sound like a big deal in the moment, but when shit hits the fan one day and you want to have kids or you want to
Yeah.
live long, like that stuff affects it, what you did when you were 16 or 20.
Yeah. And I think that is the hardest thing because when you're 16 or even 20, like you're kind of just thinking about being 16 or 20. And there's not really a whole lot of thought process of like what is going to happen in my future. And so I think that's where, like, as a coach, being really well informed and then delivering a direct message with like a soft heart, right? Like, I understand that you're struggling and you have this kind of, you know, maladaptive belief that like thinner is faster, but I'm here to tell you that thinner is not faster long term by any means. The explaining that they're in peak bone growth and that, yes, if you take calcium and supplements and things like that, get in the weight room, like you can improve bone mass and density over time. But no period is as critical as like that early high school period. And so the damage done there really does matter. And then explaining to them, like, why did you lose your menstrual cycle? What does that mean? That's signaling that your body is in a place of energy debt and it's deeming it's not safe to reproduce because reproduction is one of the first systems that's essentially non-necessary for survival. So explaining that process and then what's going to shut down next. You can start to damage heart tissue, you can start to damage internal organs. Behind opioid use, eating disorders have the second leading cause of or highest mortality rate for mental health disorders. So I think that piece of it too, even though they can seem really like normal in terms of like because they are common in our sport, and so that gives the idea that maybe they're not dangerous. But I think delivering that message of like, behind opioid use, this is the second leading cause of death for mental health illness. And that I think is like, whoa, what?
What?
Like, yeah,
Wait,
people
say that
don't
again?
know that. So behind opioid use disorder, eating disorders have the second highest mortality rate. So
What?
opioid use number one, and then
Wow.
eating disorders number two. Yeah, ahead of
That
depression.
is crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
Holy smokes. Well, what would you say to the athletes? Because I want to do a better job of this. I will state what I stated in my question to you about, hey, listen up, you can do long-term damage. But
Yes.
I'm talking to athletes who probably a lot of them have already done long-term damage. We're going to reach a lot of people who hear that and they're 25 and they feel immense guilt because they lost their
Yes.
period in high school.
Right.
What's the compassion and like the story for them of moving forward and having grace with themselves for maybe previous decisions?
Yeah. I think the idea of like you only know what you know in the moment, right? So when you were 16, you didn't know better. Now that you're older, maybe you're listening to this podcast, you're reading books, you're doing research. Now you know better. So what can we do about it? And that's the making sure that they're fueling for sustainable life, not just thinking about fueling for performance, but fueling to live long term and getting on the supplements, working with a dietitian, working with a counselor, to know that like you can undo a lot of the damage you did. Maybe not entirely. Like there might be your bone density might forever be a little bit lower than the average person, but you can improve it. And you can send the message to other athletes that like fueled is fast, not skinny is fast. And that's something that, I think we just need more people talking about, and why I think Angelina does a really great job on social media of the moments that she does slip, she's honest about it, and then she reinforces like how good she feels now that she's feeling. And so I think knowing that like the disorder is just really tricky and like you're going to have good days and bad days. And it's not about being perfect, it's just trying to do the right thing whenever you can with the knowledge that you now have, and then not being afraid to ask for help.
On the opposite end, I'm a male, so I have more experience that I can speak from that perspective. When I'm talking about periods, I'm talking way out of my league, but I'm trying to educate myself as best as I can because I'll have a wife and daughters one day, most likely. And so, I always want to shed visibility and light on that, but I'm also seeing on the other end the numbers rise. Less so, and maybe this manifests into eating disorders, but a lot of body dysmorphia for guys. And specifically, as I've just over the last 2 years gotten more and more in the gym. I mean, that is where the culture is crazy. It definitely exists in running, but I think when you're intentionally trying to put on muscle, you then look at guys who have a lot of muscle and then you like hate your body. And I myself have been there plenty of times, you know, I don't think consistently, but we're just comparative human beings. And so social media has doomed us. If you go in the gym or you go to a park, you're going to see people with different body types. And Ashley, I feel like we just, I don't know, for whatever reason, very few people I know have like actually accepted the body they exist in without, you know, comparing to other people. So on the male side, how do you work with that, the body dysmorphia trend that's sort of rising rapidly?
Yeah, I think that's, as much as females are oftentimes feel ashamed to reach out for help, males are even more so. And I think it's really, in a world that shoves beauty industry down women's throats since they're, probably like age 7 and on. It's really easy to be like, oh man, I hate my body. And that's like a normal thing that they talk with other women about and girls about. Whereas on the male side, I feel like oftentimes they're struggling with that alone and they're not willing to say it to teammates. And then locker room talk is way worse on the guy's side. And so I feel like, yeah, men are just like ruthless when it comes to that. And then, yeah, there is that comparison. And you think about, a freshman boy to like a senior boy, and that can be a huge difference in body type, both at the high school level and the college level. And then, if we have a community weight room at Wake Forest, if our guys are in there lifting at the same time that like soccer is lifting or football is lifting, and like those are completely different body types. And so, I think helping people understand that like vast majority of your body is genetic. So I think it's around like 70% is going to be just genetic factors. You were born with it, right? So there's going to be some tweaks and changes you can make. But for the most part, we all have a natural set point for weight. And when we try and manipulate that, the body doesn't like it and it usually rejects it. And that's why diets and things like that fail. So I think creating a space in which they can talk about it and then really working to try and reduce that like locker room talk is a huge component of it. And I do think there's starting to be more awareness that like when they changed, it used to be called female athlete triad and now it's called REDS or relative energy deficiency in sport because female athlete triad was very gendered. It sounded like only women could get that. Whereas we know that males can suffer from that too. And so, in the same way that like a female athlete's going to lose her menstrual cycle, a male athlete, if he went and got blood work, is going to have lower than normal testosterone rates for a male that age. But we're not doing that testing as often. And so, I think that's another thing that in pre-participation physicals across the country, we should be adding like a hormone scan to both males and females to be able to monitor for things like REDS, because again, it's just not as easy to identify it on the male side. And then men are running more, right? Like I think the average male, at least at Wake, was probably running 20 to 30 more miles a week than the women. And so you have to fuel so much in order to like meet your energy demands. Um, so yeah, I think it's by no means like a women's only issue. And I think men coming in and getting help is even harder because of the social stigmas involved with that. But that body dysmorphia is a very real thing.
How do you, as a coach, or how did you, as a coach, balance like the coaching hat, the therapist hat, the friend hat, counselor hat, instead of simultaneously wearing all of these?
Yeah, it's hard. I think, before going back to school for counseling, and knowing all that I know now, I think it was easier to just wear the coach hat. And I found myself, especially in the last year, like I'd be an athlete, one-on-one meetings with student athletes, and we'd be talking about something, and it would be very coach athlete. And then all of a sudden, I'd find myself shifting to like counselor Ashley, and then being like, oh, run it back, like that's not your role. And so I think that was probably one of the biggest realizations of like, I need to shift gears because I was like feeling more drawn to like having the counseling conversations and like helping them and supporting them in that way than I was having like the coaching conversations, which were also great. But I think that like, I don't know, inner voice that was like, know your role, that's not your job. But then feeling really like torn and conflicted that I couldn't support them in that way was ultimately, I think, what kind of led to the decision being made. Um, and it's not that you can't do a little bit of both. Obviously, like I think good coaches care about their athletes as humans too, and want to know, what are their goals in life outside of athletics. Um, but I think one of the systems we use a lot is called internal family systems, and it's this like parts work approach. And I would
Love it.
find
I
myself,
literally work with a therapist. That's what we do.
oh yes, it's
Yeah.
amazing. It is
This is the
amazing.
second time that parts theory has come up on the podcast in the last week.
Really? Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. That's amazing. Yeah. And so I would find myself all of a sudden going like, what part of you is saying that? Or like, let's talk to the part of you that's like really upset over this. And then be like, okay, Ashley, no, like your coach, you're not their therapist,
Yeah.
stop going into like parts work with them. But it was so hard because I could like see that part that was like desperately needed a reassurance and was like essentially crying out to be seen and heard. And then I was like, not your job. Like, go talk
Yeah.
to Javi about it or Katie, which we had amazing sports psychologists at Wake Forest. And I had great relationships with them. So that was like, if I would catch myself, I'd be like, tell Javi that in our meeting today, like parts work came up and like, there's this part of you that's feeling like really unheard. And maybe you guys could explore that together. So, or if an athlete was struggling with body dysmorphia or just, you know, maybe someone was struggling with some eating stuff, like I would have the meeting with the athlete and then say, I'm going to go check in with Katie or Javi. And I'd walk down to their office and say, hey, so and so mentioned this today. I told them I was going to tell you, just giving you the heads up. And so that partnership, I think, helped keep me at bay of knowing like maybe I couldn't support them in that role, but like they had people at Wake Forest that could.
If you were put on the board at the NCAA, what changes would you make immediately?
Oh gosh, way more education for both coaches and athletes. All things mental health, but especially eating disorders. I would love to design like a course in parts work for coaches and administrators and things like that. Yeah, I think that that would just be like really eye opening. And then I think putting together some data and statistics in terms of like how have all of these changes in the NCAA positively and negatively impacted our student athletes today? And then how can we try and bridge that gap? Because obviously, again, any change is going to have positive and negative. But how do we gear it more towards like positive change versus some of the things that have, you know, been more negative or have increased an athlete tying their self-worth to their performance because of, again, maybe the financial gains that are at stake.
What would you say was the biggest, if you had to pin it down to one thing, biggest reason that you decided to leave coaching?
Yeah. I think obviously like what I was just talking about there of knowing that like in this system, in the current system, I couldn't be everything that I wanted to be for a student athlete. And I couldn't always put the human first because my job was at the end of the day performance. I was going to be hired and fired based on performance. And as much as I can want to put that aside and say the human's the most important thing, and if you need to take the day off, take the day off. You need to take a month off, take the month off. Like, let's always put your mental health first. I'm in a system that makes that really challenging. And not because that's a fault of the system. That's not a coach's job is not to be their mental health therapist, right? The coach's job is to produce results, and to treat people well. Um, Obviously, I think most coaches like do that, but yeah, I think that pull to be more, I guess, for them was probably the biggest thing. Or is watching someone sit across from me struggling and knowing I could just only do so much when I could actually do so much more if I was in a different role and had the different title.
If you want to talk about results, you had quite the results while you were there. Was that ever tough where it's like, it's not like you were bad at producing results, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. No, I think it was really reassuring that like results can come alongside treating people well and doing things the right way and caring about the person. Um, And I think that was part of it. This year on paper was, I don't know, objectively like my best year at Wake from a performance standpoint, but like I
Did
didn't
that make it harder to walk
necessarily
away?
know,
No?
which no, which was kind of the weird. I think that was like then it was like, okay, if that didn't make it harder to leave, then maybe like the performance side isn't what drives me, which I think I always knew that. My husband always says, like, you're pretty like not competitive in terms of like actual coaching standards. Now a game of cards, like I want to win for sure. But in terms of like, I don't think performance was ever my main driver, both as an athlete and as a coach. And so I think the fact that it was the best year ever and that didn't make it harder to leave. In fact, I think this was the year I felt the most conflicted with wanting to leave. um, was a pretty good indicator that like the human side, and the mental health side is far more my passion than the results side. And the results are fun, and it's a metric of helping people do something that they never thought they could, and seeing that like confidence and self-belief grow. But it was never about the wins or the losses. I could win a national title and I don't think I would view it any different. That's just not like the driver for me, which is pretty unique, I feel like, to most coaches.
Do you think you'll ever return?
So I think probably in some capacity, I'm going to stay on actually coaching a few of my post collegiates. So some women that have graduated that I've got great relationships with, and we know like a system that works really well for them. So that will be fun. I feel like I'll get to do just the coaching side and also, the human side, because there's not, I don't know. I mean, and that can't, I guess they can fire me, but I don't have like, a hire fire approach. And so I'm excited to do that. And maybe that will grow. Maybe it won't. I don't know. I've had some people reach out maybe about some other post collegiate opportunities, or there's some like youth local like groups in the area too that one of my friends runs. And he's like, oh, maybe you could help out with that. So undoubtedly running will continue to be a part of my life. Hopefully with the mental health side and working with athletes in the sport, but probably in some coaching role as well. But I don't know that I'll ever go back to the NCAA in college. Maybe, but no time
Time
soon.
will tell. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
much do you think these issues are like trickle down? By that I mean we mentioned some of the, you know, the international wave and the NCAA, the age things, and it's like, okay, immediately that creates, or the roster spots, that creates more pressure. From
Yeah.
that pressure, you're gonna feel this like intense pressure to succeed within this given a time. And then from
Yeah.
that, that's where I'm sure a lot of like the eating disorders or negative thoughts, or even overly placing your self-worth in a sport that you're going to the school and it's technically a club. Like I think people forget that. Like that
Yeah.
NCAA has become professionalized, but it's like, no, you're actually a student there and you happen to
Hmm.
be in a sports club, essentially.
Yeah. I think it's created this like really unhealthy sense of urgency. And when humans, like, urgency is generally not the most comfortable emotion, right? And when things feel really urgent, anxiety generally spikes, and we often maybe do things that we wouldn't have in like a more rational state. So we something I talked a lot with the athletes about is like amygdala hijacking of the brain. And so if you had like hand model of the brain, if this is like prefrontal cortex here, in a healthy brain that's in charge of decision making, that'd be like a race day where you're feeling confident and you've done the work, and you're prepared. It's kind of like that appropriate level of challenge. And then as soon as it starts to feel like a threat, then the lid flips and the amygdala, which would be like the thumb, more emotional side of the brain, takes over and perceives everything as like a threat. And I think that is where we see a lot of student athletes right now, is they're being like hijacked by amygdalas, and they're in this like danger, fight or flight. Everything is important, and there's just really no like disconnecting, and being able to just like sit in like rational thought. They're in that really like highly emotional brain, that is not the brain we want to be running the show on a regular basis. So I think, as a coach, like I tried to teach like coping skills and things like that, and building awareness around like warning signs of amygdala hijacking, as we called it. But I don't think that it's almost like as humans right now, and college athletes and coaches and administrators, there's so much dysregulation of the nervous system that it seems normal. And if you actually are like the calm, regulated one, you're like the outlier. Whereas I would love to have more coaches have regulated nervous systems, which would help their teams have or regulated nervous systems. But that also goes higher up to like administration needing to have more regulated nervous systems too. So I guess we'll put that into our mental health course that we build for the NCAA in terms of nervous system awareness and what does a regulated nervous system do for you in your terms of your ability to lead. Yeah, I'm
I
sure
love
you've
that.
talked about that with your parts work.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Give me the honest, straight shooter response, not the political one. If your daughter or your son one day, like if they wanted to run in the NCAA, I know you're the type of person who would be like, you can't do this, right? But theoretically, so maybe I'll flip the question to how nervous or scared would you be if your son or daughter was entering the NCAA?
I would feel I still think there's so many good things. Like I loved my experience as a student athlete, even the hard parts. And there was so many positives to coaching that I absolutely would let them. Side note, I don't want kids, so I won't ever
Theoretically,
face that challenge. But
sure.
theoretically, if I had a child, I would definitely let them run in the NCAA. I would be very selective about which like coaching staffs I would let them run for. Just because I, would want to know like that who was leading them had their best interest in mind, to as much as, as they can, again, within the roles of a coach. But I would definitely let them do it. I think the leadership lessons, the friendships that they're going to make, the, skills to learn how to balance things, like I would say yes. And if people ask me, should I run in the NCAA, I would say yes. Like, I think it still is such an amazing system. It's got some flaws and some things to work on, but I wouldn't ever tell someone not to.
What would you like? What is it? What's it going to take to change some of these issues, these conversations, both the conversations that need more visibility, whether it's like mental health, eating disorders, or the actual changes that probably need to be made in regards to, you know, roster spots, NIL, you know, 27-year-olds in the NCAA, eighth years, all that stuff. Where do we
Yeah,
start?
gosh, probably just with this, right? Having the conversations. I think, 2 years ago, Reds was not talked about at all. And then all of a sudden, I see it all the time. And so I think you just have to start the conversations and then have people realize it's not so uncomfortable to talk about them, and we can be real and honest. Um, and then from there, how do we elicit change? And change is obviously kind of starts at like the individual level and then has to kind of grow from there. Um, but it would also probably help if the NCAA wasn't being sued on a regular basis and there weren't like new lawsuits and settlements like every other day. That's dramatic, but not totally, right? So I think everyone feels a little directionless right now, um, because there's just something new coming out every day. But I think to start, coaches could, educate themselves better in terms of all things mental health.
What are you taking with you leaving the NCAA? What do you feel like your experience has taught you?
Work ethic for sure. I love the grind, and that's going to be, um, yeah, really different in like not the NCAA. I think that's, but I don't want to necessarily fully keep that because I would like to have a little bit more time for like family and vacations and having free evenings and weekends. What a concept. But I also I like working, and I like the grind, and so I want to do my job in counseling really really well, but I also want to work towards some of these like changes and reforms that need to happen, and doing that from more of a place of like I'm excited about it, I'm passionate about it, instead of it feeling like work. um, but yeah, and all the relationships. There's so many people that I've met through the NCAA that are some of my best friends, and I want to be really intentional about keeping those relationships. And I've told a lot of my coaching friends, like, I know I'm going to have to be the one that reaches out to you because you're going to be busy with coaching and recruiting and, just being in the hamster wheel that is college athletics. And so I'm going to call you. And if you don't answer, I'm going to call you again, and we're going to find a way to stay in touch and maybe be a sounding board for them too. Because I know how overwhelming it can be as a coach to be in the system.
I have to ask you, I'd be remiss if I didn't. I'm an Ohio boy through and through. I love Columbus. I don't necessarily love the rest of the state, but I take pride coming from a smaller state, and I feel like people
Yeah.
who come from Ohio have Ohio pride. They'll always say, like, just kid from Ohio or whatever. So growing up, I got to experience, and we were in high school at the same time, I got to experience the legend of Elizabeth Whaley, and she was actually on the podcast her senior year of high school, like back when the podcast was like
Yeah.
nothing. What was it like coaching her? Again, Ohio people take pride in each other, so it was amazing to see her be so good in
Yeah.
Ohio and then continue to be great in the NCAA.
Yeah. Elizabeth's amazing. I mean, she is just like a bright light to everyone who knows her. She's the type of person that like lights up any room she walks into. She was a team captain for me for her last 2 years and did a phenomenal job at that. And obviously, like phenomenal results and things like that too. But the impact that she had on the team in terms of like helping the young ones, figure out who they were, what they wanted, and helping them understand like the expectations of the college system and like what to say yes to, what to say no to in order to be successful, was huge. And if anyone was ever struggling, she was going to be the first teammate to put like a handwritten note in their locker,
Oh,
like she was the best. And that will be one of the people that I keep coaching. So
nice.
I'm super excited to continue working with her. We, I guess, made that official like a monthish ago. And yeah, helping her kind of continue to chase some goals that she has in running. And she's just such a fearless competitor too. I mean, she's like so sweet off the track and then the gun goes off and like this just fearless, like take no prisoners mentality comes out. And I always know I will get 100% of Elizabeth on the day. And again, the 100% on different days is going to look different, but she never lines up and I go, oh, I wonder if like I won't get the best of what she has today. It will always be the best of what she has, which is like such a gift and such a skill to have. So I'm thrilled to continue working with her. And it's nice. She's just going to be living down in Charlotte. So it's only about an hour from Winston. So we'll be able to do some stuff in person, but it'll be mostly virtual.
What's the lasting legacy that you want to have left in the NCAA?
I guess like never giving up on a kid. People are going to have been through some really hard things, whether it's an eating disorder or, you know, trauma in his past or just different things that could make it easier for them to just like walk away from the sport. And if you can be someone that says, like, I see you, I believe in you, and I know you still have so much more to accomplish, then I think you can like help that student athlete achieve such great things. And so I would hope that I leave that behind. And then I'm going to continue working with like the women's mentorship program. And so continuing to get more women in the sport, which feels a little, I don't know. That was another hard part of leaving was like, I'm such a proponent for female coaches and getting women and keeping women in the sport. And then I left it. So I've got to sit with that, maybe talk to my own therapist about it, in terms of like not feeling, I guess, like a fraud. But all of my mentees that I've had in the past, like when I reached out to them and told them I was leaving, they were like, but will you still mentor me? And so I think that was reassuring that like I can still have value in that space, even if I'm not an active coach in the NCAA. So I want to continue working with that population as well.
Well, Ashley, thanks for the time today. You're an absolute legend. I appreciate the range of things you spoke to, the ways you contributed to the sport, and now all the ways that you're giving back in different ways. True honor to get to know you this morning, and you're welcome back on anytime and can't wait to cheer you on in the future. So thanks for all you do and
Awesome.
thanks for all you did.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Thanks so much.